Today was rather painful. I know I want to learn backgrounds. I know I have to, but I don't know how.
Perspective.
Character blindly.
I don't know how. As I sat frustrated and unsure what to do, I grabbed my phone and asked ChatGPT how to draw backgrounds. Of course, it was just basic jargon that was useless for the most part. But in his reply, there was a small point where it mentioned focusing in on one specific area like urban landscapes, futuristic landscapes, light, textures, and so on. And while reading that, it was like a switch just flipped in my head. Let's break it down into steps. I'm basically at zero. So, how do I get from zero to here? What steps do I need to follow? What collection of know-hows would I need? And with that process, I decided to break up my studies into four sections: perspective, textures, light, and specific background objects. In my head, if I combine these four areas, I should be able to effectively learn backgrounds. And so the first day, I spent breaking down the perspectives in reference photos by observing the images and trying to draw it, keeping the basics of perspective in mind, of course, like where the horizon line would fall and where the vanishing points are and all that jazz. I was simply freehanding the clearly visible lines until I began to see where they're meeting. It becomes very easy to see the grid this way, and you can grab a ruler and clean it up later on. Doing this helped me in being able to draw basic backgrounds which felt and looked like an actual background would look. Of course, these were just sketches and we still have ways to go. At this point, the perspective became easier to spot in everything I look at. Everything around me was in perspective. I intentionally avoided more complicated perspectives with 4 or 5 vanishing points. I'll look at that a bit later. I initially wanted to study textures at this point, but I quickly realized how much work it takes to draw the background, let alone detail it with textures. Of course, if it's a close-up on a specific object, then it would make sense to detail the textures, but with backgrounds like buildings and streets, I figured simple is better. While drawing this, I was wondering how to draw something like this with a lot of shadows and leaves and all those little complicated things. But then I saw this photo and it more or less took me back to the same idea of simple is better. So I tried to shade by simply hatching, and honestly, it wasn't too bad. I also started to keep in mind of the direction of the light and how the shadows would fall at this point. I wanted to challenge myself to draw more lively backgrounds. A background like this is fine and all, but it feels lifeless, you know what I mean? Look at these two backgrounds. One obviously has more character and life, and that's how I wanted my backgrounds to feel. So I continued practicing with backgrounds I personally felt like had life in them. I don't know if that makes any sense. At this point, I mostly just gathered backgrounds that have the same vibe as how I see Neo in my head. So what did I learn? Perspective is the only thing that matters with backgrounds. If you can draw in perspective, you can draw any sort of background. It seems obvious now, but I was really confused at first. My background drawing process is a simple one. I begin my drawing by figuring out the perspective. I don't use a ruler, I just freehand it until I get the feel of the perspective. It's easy when I can clearly see the horizon line, but sometimes it's not so visible. That's why I just begin by drawing and elongating all the lines until a grid begins to form and I can clearly see the vanishing points. I then do a rough sketch, then try and make my lines more straight and clear. I stopped at this point with most of the drawings because at this point everything has been figured out. I can clean it up and add as many details as I want and it will still come out fine. There are probably techniques people use to draw certain types of backgrounds, but from what I've seen from other artists, they all seem to have their own style of drawing. That's why I'm drawing images like this, because that's the feel of my manga. I want to develop my own way of drawing backgrounds like this. Someone who's drawing a slice of life manga about high school romance or whatever probably wouldn't draw such backgrounds. Or in this one, anyways. I guess what I'm trying to say is I'm orienting my studies towards the style of my manga. Mastering backgrounds and developing my own techniques isn't something that will happen overnight. And so I'm moving on to the next weakness, paneling. But with every study I do, I'll be making sure to add on top of what I've already learned. And so as I'm studying panels, I'll be drawing the backgrounds and stuff alongside all that. You know, incremental progress. If you enjoy what I do and would like to help me bring Neo into life, you can support me on Ko-Fi or become a member of my Patreon. Any sort of support greatly helps me out. Thank you so much for watching, and